We'll continue our discussion of Qohelet, the second part of chapter 2 of Qohelet. He got to this depressing point where he says, "V'saneti et haim." He says, "I hate life." This is a strong statement. Why does he say that? Because he says previously, "ראיתי אני שיש יתרון לחוכמה מן הסכלות כיתרון האור מן החושך." He says he's a wise man. He says like they do in the SATs, right? Wisdom to foolishness is as light is to darkness, right? He says this is the comparison. Meaning that this is such a clear advantage to being wise over being a fool. No one can deny that. Just as people prefer light over darkness, you want to if you walk in darkness, you don't know where you're going. If you walk in a lit place, you know where you're going. It's the same thing as a wise person. You know what you're doing. You know where your actions will lead you. And if you're a fool, you're not. So it says, despite that clear advantage that wisdom has over foolishness, yada'ti gam'ani shemikre had yikra kulam. He says, but at the end of the day, they're all, the same thing is going to happen to all of them. ואמרתי אני בליבי, כמגרה הכסיל, גם אני יקרני, ולמה חכמתי אני אז יותר? ודיברתי בליבי, שגם זה האבל. So he's telling us about what is going through his mind. He said, whatever happens to the fool, eventually will happen to me as well. I will die and perish, or if we talk about accidents, or diseases, or things that are not within our control, it's going to happen anyway. So, lama hachamti, what is the point of pursuing wisdom? I'm not gaining anything from it. So he decided that if this also, wisdom is vain, it's vanity. כי אין זיכרון לחכם עם הכסיל לעולם, ושכבר הימים הבאים הכל נשכח. Eventually all will be forgotten. And he gets into this point of hatred and despair. כי מה הובל האדם בכל עמלו ורעיון ליבו שהוא עמל תחת השמש. What do you gain eventually? כל ימיו מכאובים וחרס עניינו, גם בלילה לא שכב ליבו. The man is always concerned, is angry about this, is concerned about that, there are pains and diseases. Even at night, you cannot have full rest. And he's speaking as the king, who apparently has everything at his disposal. אין טוב באדם שיאכל ושתה ויראה את נפשו טוב בעמלו. גם זו ראיתי אני, כי מיד האלוהים הוא. It seems that the only good thing that you could, is as long as you could eat and drink and enjoy your handiwork, that's just this temporary joy that you have. And he adds, כי לאדם שטוב לפניו נתן חוכמה ודעת ושמחה, ולחוטא נתן עניין לאסוף ולכנוס לתת לטוב לפני האלוהים, גם זה הבל ורעות רוח. Here he speaks about reward and punishment. If you are going to argue that the one who found favor in the eyes of God, God gives him the good life, but not to the sinner, say גם זה הבל. This is also not true. Where he looks around him. And in chapter 3, he launches into the famous statement of there is a season for everything. And it is beautifully structured. It's also misleading. If you read it as is, it seems like you have two columns. Column A, column B. Column A is positive, column B is negative. But it's not so. Let's read through them. It says, עת ללדת ועת למות, עת לטעת ועת לעקור נטוע, להרוג, לרפוא, לפרוץ, לבנות, לבכות, לשחוק, שפות ריקוד, להשליך אבנים, כנוס אבנים, לחבוק, לרחוק מחבק, לבקש, לאבד, לשמור, להשליך, לקרוע, לתפור, לחשות, לדבר, לאהוב, לשנוא, עת מלחמה ועת שלום. I skipped the word עת because it's repetitive and it's beautiful in the Hebrew. But what do we have here? It has 16 sets of actions that have all a set time. There's a time for being born and for dying. Planting and uprooting the planted. Slaying and healing. Tearing down, building up. Weeping and laughing. Wailing and dancing. Throwing stones and gathering stones. Embracing and shunning embraces. Seeking and losing. Keeping and discarding, ripping and sewing, silence and speaking, a time for loving, a time for hating, a time for war, and a time for peace. So when he says there's a time for each, does he mean that we have to designate times to do that, or that those things will inevitably come, that we cannot avoid them there, whether we want it or not? Somewhere in the calendar that we cannot see, it says dying, rejoicing, dancing, embracing. Probably that is his intention. Not saying that we have to set time in advance. We cannot do that. But also the way that those two columns are set are not as clear that we have positive versus negative. Because when it says "Ad laledet ve'ad lamut," time for being born, time for dying. Dying is clearly not good. Nobody wants that. We're all afraid of death. But being born is questionable. Some people, when you ask them, they say, "I'd rather not have been born at all." Right? There's a Bohemian Rhapsody. It says, "Sometimes I wish I'd never been born at all." But besides that, this is not our choice. Both of them are not our choice. When we say "Ad laledet ve'ad lamut," but the being born is a choice that is not even. There's no awareness of the person who's being born that he or she is being born. Then the next set is planting and uprooting the planted. The immediate understanding is that positive, negative, but sometimes when you uproot the planted, it's not negative. It's done in order to grow the other trees around it. So it's maybe bad for that specific plant that you're uprooting. Or if you're weeding, you're removing weeds. It's also not a positive thing. Then, first he speaks about slaying and then healing. So first the negative, then the positive. But also they're not equivalent, because the opposite of slaying is not healing. It's reviving, or the opposite of healing should be wounding. So this is the subtle way of the author to tell us that not only there are set times for things that happen in our lives, but there is no real balance. It's not that one cancels the other off. There are different aspects, there are different occasions. Crying and laughing. It starts with the positive, the negative goes to the positive. There's time to eulogize, to wail, and there's a time to dance. And here, in verse 5, is maybe the most ambiguous of all the others. It's "Ait le'ashlich avanim, ve'ait kenos avanim." There is a time for throwing stones, and there's a time for gathering stones. So which one of them is positive? Which one of them is negative?
Throwing is negative.
Throwing is negative, but what if you are throwing stones away from your field in order to be able to plow?
You gather to build.
And you gather to build, right? So, but you could gather the stones also in order to wage war. You know, as they used to. So, it doesn't say what is the purpose of gathering or throwing the stones away. It just says that sometimes you look at the stone and it's important for you. Sometimes you're going to discard it, as it says in the next one. But altogether, when we take all these actions into consideration, what Shlomo is saying is that there are so many different things that happen in our lives that come at certain times, whether we want them or not. And maybe even when he says that you gather the stone, you throw the stone, you seek something, you throw something, you keep it or you discard it, it's the same exact thing. That at one point you think, I don't need it at all, and then a day later or a year later says, I wish I had it. How many times it happened to us that we had an opportunity, we didn't use it, we don't need this, but then a while later we say, oh, I wish I would have taken this opportunity. Or something that we have kept for years and never used, and we thought it might be important, and it just occupied space, and maybe, whether physical or abstract, and cause us to lose another opportunity. First of all, to address what Danielle said about people who choose death, like I said, it's a very small percentage, but that is part of the differentiation that Qohelet offers. He doesn't say everything is set and everything is balanced for every person who is born. There's a person who's going to die, because it's not the same set of circumstances or conditions at the birth that is a death. Not for every war there's peace. There will be countries who for years, for hundreds of years, will live in peace, and others who will live in constant war. But even peace and war, even peace is not an absolute value. You could look at Switzerland during World War II. It was a peaceful country, right? They were neutral. But there's no neutrality at war because their neutrality helped the Nazis. So that is just part of what Qohelet does by leading you through 16 sets, 32 different actions that at first sight you read it, oh, balance, black and white, yin and yang. No, it's not. It says each one of them has subtle differences, and he wants to show you the vicissitudes of life. There's how many factors in our lives that we cannot control. Like what David mentioned, earthquakes. Where do they come into the picture? Not so much in Qohelet here. It's more the concern of Yov. But later on, we will find this very interesting verse. It says, "Ki lo yeda'a adam et ito kadagim anehazim b'mtzuda ra'a." So sometimes we feel like we are a fish caught in the web, caught in the net. We don't know. We're all swimming about and enjoying our life, and then people are caught and gone away, and we don't know why.
Right. Thank you for that interpretation. I've always read that as talking about the fullness of life, everything is included.
Yes.
Or the another interpretation is the appropriateness of our actions at the right moment.
Yes. I think that's also
our response to it happens as it's supposed to, as it's meant to be.
Right. I think that's also included, that we have to respond appropriately to things that happen. But I think that the beauty of that piece is that it's slightly distorted. It's you look at something. It's just like looking at a beautiful picture. You know that when art moved from into modern art, and artists like Degas and Van Gogh and others started doing something which is like pixelating. If you look from afar, the picture looks perfect. You come closer, you're like just dots. And people were not happy with that. And then you moved into Cubism and others. This is the same thing what Shlomo does. He gives you like this beautiful picture from afar. Everything is clear. Everything is organized. There's time for this, time for that, time for this, time for that. You come closer and say, wait a second. It doesn't really work that way. I cannot prepare myself to do this or to do that. And it's not the same reaction. So it's sort of he presents the randomness within what we perceive as the order in the universe, and he says, so where do you live your life? Are you on the scale of randomness or order? That's a constant balance that you have to work with, and he's not happy with that. He says we do all that, and he says at the end, if we have all these things coming at us, what is the advantage for us? גם את העולם נתן בליבם, מבלי אשר לא ימצא את האדם את המעשה אשר עשה אלוהים מראש ועד סוף. This is a very confusing verse. What Qohelet says is, את הכל עשה יפה בעיתו. From the point of view of God, everything is in its appropriate time. But for us, את העולם נתן בליבם. The word עולם as world does not exist in the Tanakh. In the Tanakh, the word olam is eternity. It's a definition of time and not a definition of space. In the Tanakh, the words for the world is either heled or tevel or aretz, but not olam. When we say mina olam v'ada olam, means from the beginning of time to the end of time. So et olam natan belibam is a double entendre that on one hand God gave us the time within our heart, meaning we are limited to a certain, instead of living eternal life like God, we are limited in time, but also from the word ne'ilam, something which is unknown. So mibeli asher lo yimtza adam, in a way that we can never determine and understand what is it that God wants. So he goes on with that, and he looks at the world. He says, what is his other problem? ועוד ראיתי תחת השמש. He says another thing that I've seen. It says, we have learned, he says, Ha'elokim yavakesh nirdaf. The way he was brought up, the way he was taught, is that God protects the weak and those who are persecuted. He says, but what I see is Mekom HaMishpat Shama HaResha, or Mekom HaTzedek Shama HaResha. In the seat of justice, where you look for justice and judgment, you see wickedness. How does that happen? Later on, he'll explain it in the next chapter. I'm skipping because those are things that he, as I said in the introduction, Qohelet goes through like a journey. So he goes back and forth to the same concept. In verse 5, he speaks, in chapter 5, verse 7, he speaks about the problem of corruption. As the king, he says, Mekom HaTzedek Shama HaResha, where as a king, he realized that where you sometimes expect justice, you get wickedness or distortion. And he says this, Im oshek rash v'gezel mishpat v'tzedek tireh b'medina. If you see in the province oppression and corruption and taking away the possessions of the poor, al titmah ala hefetz. Don't be surprised. Why? Ki gavoha me'al gavoha shomer ugvohim alehem. Gavoa me'al gavoa shomer ugvohim alehem. It says because there's a hierarchy in the government. To each official, there's an official of a higher position. So ugvohim alehem, until you get all the way to the top. At the top, the king is at the top. But so all of his subordinates theoretically are supposed to take care of the people, but in practice, each one takes care of his own business and throws some bones to the citizens. Even today, even in the democratic society, we know of pork barrels and bribes and other incentives that go between the elected officials and the people. There's a story that illustrates that from Alf Layla wa Layla from the Middle East. They said that the Khalif Harun al-Rashid went one day to see the city, to see how people are living, and he came to the quarter, a very poor neighborhood, where there was the place was not well maintained. You couldn't walk. The streets were muddy. So he called his vizier. He says, I give you a budget, whatever it is, 100,000 dinars, and go fix it. The vizier called his subordinates. 2 of them gave each of them 30,000, kept 40 to himself, and says, go fix it. And so it went down until when it came to the level of the hamula, of the people who actually live in the street, the commander came and says, listen, you have to fix the road in front of your house. Yeah, we have no budget for that, but you have to take care of that. And of course, it was not fixed. My grandfather also used to say the following. He says, what happens when there's corruption in the system? He used to say that when you choke on bread, you drink water. What happens when you choke on water? When the water gets stuck on your when he says he means when the water gets stuck in your throat, meaning that if you confront injustice from a lower official, you go to the judge. But when the judge is corrupt, what are you going to do? You go to the king. If the king is corrupt, where are you going to go? It says v'yitron aretz bakolhu melech lesadeni avad. At the end of the day, if you think that the one on top is the king is also enslaved to what? Melech lesadeni avad. The king is subjugated to his possessions. If just as any other human being, he cares most about his possessions and not. It's speaking about, of course, the corrupt king, and not about his people. So his decisions and his political movements will not be towards what is best for the people, but what is best in order to maintain his prowess and his own wealth. So chapter 5, also in the middle of chapter 5, we're not ending on a very positive note. Qohelet keeps on observing all the ailments of the world. We'll continue tomorrow, going back to chapter 4 and going through chapter 5.